Can you imagine living in a time when science was almost non-existent and remedies were as frightening as the diseases themselves? Where the cure for a simple toothache involved hot iron and the treatment for insanity required a hole in the skull? Welcome to the Middle Ages, a period as fascinating as it is unsettling. Today, we'll delve together into the mysteries and the strangest practices of an era that profoundly shaped human history. You'll uncover remedies that defy logic, treatments that blended faith, superstition, and sometimes a hint of desperation. This video is a true deep dive into a world of beliefs and methods that make us appreciate just how far medicine has evolved. If you enjoy curious and surprising stories from the medieval world, now is the time to join me on this journey into the past. Get ready, because what's coming next is simply unbelievable. Imagine a time when death walked the streets. It was 1347 when the Black Plague arrived in Europe, one of the most devastating pandemics in history. In just 5 years, it claimed the lives of approximately 25 million people, nearly half of Europe's population at the time. The symptoms were terrifying: high fever, dark spots on the skin, and painful swellings known as buboes, which often turned into pus-filled sores. But the most frightening aspect wasn't just the disease, but the treatments used to combat it. Without understanding bacteria or viruses, doctors believed the plague was caused by an imbalance in the body's humors, a medical concept of the time. And what was the solution? Leeches. Yes, these slimy creatures were applied directly to the skin to suck out the contaminated blood and restore the body's balance. These practices not only failed to cure the plague, but often worsened the situation, leading to excessive blood loss and further weakening of the patients. In addition to leeches, other preventive methods included burning aromatic herbs, believing that the plague was spread by bad air, the infamous miasma. It was a time when science was taking its first steps, and superstition dictated much of the medical decisions. Today, we know that the Black Plague was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted by fleas from rats. But back then, people fought with the tools they had, even if those tools were leeches. Now imagine suffering from severe headaches, seizures, or behaviors considered abnormal in the Middle Ages. Without modern knowledge of neurology, how would you be treated? The answer might shock you: trepanning. Yes, literally drilling a hole in the skull was seen as a viable solution for mental illnesses and even to expel evil spirits. The practice of trepanning involved using simple tools, such as knives and awls, to open the patient's skull. The goal? To release the demons or relieve intracranial pressure believed to be causing the suffering. What is surprising is that many of these operations were performed without anesthesia, as it had yet to be discovered. Amazingly, archaeologists have found skulls of patients who survived this horrific procedure, with signs of healing around the holes. This means that somehow, amidst such an invasive and painful practice, some people actually lived to tell the tale. Trepanning was not exclusive to the Middle Ages. In fact, it dates back thousands of years earlier. However, during the medieval era, the lack of knowledge about infections and the central nervous system made the procedure even more risky and often fatal. Today, we understand that most of the conditions they tried to treat with trepanning have complex causes, ranging from epilepsy to mental illnesses. Modern treatments like medication and therapy have replaced these brutal practices. However, trepanning reminds us of how humanity has always sought solutions to alleviate suffering, even when scientific knowledge was limited. Imagine being afflicted by a disfiguring disease, with painful swellings in the neck and face, and believing that the only possible cure was in the hands of a monarch. This was the reality for those suffering from scrofula in the Middle Ages, a condition also known as the king's evil. Scrofula, an infection of the lymph nodes caused by tuberculosis, caused terrible symptoms: swollen glands, pus-filled abscesses, and a general sense of weakness. Without antibiotics available, treatments were limited or non-existent. Thus, people placed their hope in a practice that blended faith and medicine, the royal touch. It was believed that kings, chosen by God, possessed healing powers. In solemn ceremonies, monarchs would touch the sick, offering blessings in the hope of a cure. This practice was more than an act of mercy. It was a demonstration of divine power, reaffirming the king's authority and legitimacy. Kings, such as Henry VII of England and Louis XIV of France, regularly performed these ceremonies. Thousands of people gathered in search of a miraculous cure, and historical records mention cases where patients claimed to have improved after the royal touch. Although scrofula sometimes regressed on its own, the lack of an actual cure meant that any improvement was attributed to the divine power of the monarch. In the absence of science, faith filled the gaps in medical understanding. With the advancement of medicine, we now understand that scrofula is caused by an infection of the tuberculosis bacillus. The development of antibiotics in the 20th century transformed the treatment of this disease, eliminating the need for mystical rituals and miraculous cures. Leprosy, one of the most feared diseases of the Middle Ages, devastated not only bodies, but also hearts and souls. A diagnosis of leprosy meant more than just a sentence of physical suffering. It was a complete social exclusion, an exile that paradoxically took on an almost sacred character. At the time, leprosy was seen as a divine punishment, a mark of spiritual impurity. Those diagnosed were forced to live in isolated colonies, often overseen by religious institutions. Separated from society, lepers were led to a sanctified exile, where exclusion was justified under the pretext of protecting the community. The church played a central role in this process. Before being sent to leper colonies, the afflicted underwent a symbolic funeral ceremony in which they were declared dead to the world. Paradoxically, while society saw them as outcasts, the church treated them as souls to be redeemed, offering a form of earthly purgatory. Life in leper colonies was marked by isolation and poverty. Many devoted themselves to religious practices, believing that their devotion might bring spiritual, if not physical, relief. Contact with the outside world was limited, and lepers used bells to alert others to their presence. Today, we know that leprosy, or Hansen's disease, is caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae. With the discovery of effective treatments, such as multi-drug therapy, leprosy is no longer a sentence of isolation. However, for centuries, the absence of an effective cure meant that exile was the only solution. Imagine the throbbing pain of an infected tooth. Now amplify that discomfort without access to modern painkillers or proper dental care. In the Middle Ages, a toothache was a terrifying experience, and the methods to treat it were as bizarre as they were painful. Without knowledge of bacteria and without anesthesia, treatments ranged from grotesque to dangerous. One of the most extreme methods involved using hot iron to cauterize the affected tooth. This not only destroyed the dental pulp, but also exposed the patient to severe risks of infection and burns. Another popular treatment was the application of arsenic-based potions. It was believed that the poison could kill the worm causing the pain, But in reality, the risk of severe poisoning was high. These potions often caused more harm than good, leading to serious complications and, in some cases, if the pain persisted, the last resort was tooth extraction. However, without proper tools and anatomical knowledge, this process was extremely painful and often resulted in infections or uncontrollable bleeding. It was not uncommon for these operations to be performed by barber surgeons, whose training was limited. In addition to physical methods, patients often resorted to superstitions. Amulets, prayers, and even spells were used to ward off the pain, while the causes were attributed to supernatural forces or imbalances of bodily humors. Toothache in the Middle Ages shows us how despair can lead to unimaginable extremes. Every potion, every hot iron cauterization was an attempt to alleviate suffering in a world without modern relief. Today, as we look back, we can see how far we've come and how important it is to appreciate the advances that make our lives more comfortable and safe. And so, we journey together through the shadows of the Middle Ages, a time when diseases were fought with methods that now seem like something out of a nightmare. But what can we take from this journey? A valuable lesson about human resilience, the ability to survive even in the face of the unknown, and how far we've come in the quest for healing and relief. If you felt inspired by these stories of perseverance, leave your comment below. Which treatment surprised you the most? How do you view the evolution of medicine? Like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we explore the past to better understand the present and shape the future together.